Good evening and welcome to the April 9th, 2026 meeting of San Diego Community Power's Community Advisory Committee. My name is Luis Montero Adams and I represent the city of San Diego. As Chair David Harris is unable to be with us today, I will be presiding over today's meeting. I welcome members of the public, San Diego Community Power staff, and committee members joining us in person and online today. Thank you to Community Power staff for making this in-person meeting possible and to the Port of San Diego for accommodating us today. I will now call the meeting to order. Assistant Clerk of the Board, Sandra Vences, will now call the roll.
Committee member Sclafani. Committee member Gonzalez.
Here.
Committee member Herman.
Here.
Committee member Hoyt.
Here.
Committee member Anderson.
Barely here.
Committee member Sumner. Committee member Santos. Here. Committee member Emerson.
Here.
Committee member Vasilakis.
Present.
Secretary Pike. Vice Chair Montero Adams.
Present.
Chair Harris. Yes, one.
I will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Members. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We would also like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that the Kumeyaay Nation are the original inhabitants of the land now known as San Diego, where this meeting is taking place. Today, we carry their legacy forward, ensuring that their traditions continue to thrive in gratitude and strength, and we stand with the Kumeyaay Nation, connected to our past and committed to a more just, sustainable, and resilient future for all. Joining us this evening for the first time are Brandon Lewis, Community Power's Communications Associate, and Will Wiseman, Associate Director of Finance, Capital Investment Plan. Would each of you like to stand and introduce yourselves?
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Brandon Lewis. I'm a new communications associate for San Diego Community Power. I bring about 20 years of experience in the communications field, San Diego Community Power, and look forward to working with all of you and helping to communicate the various programs, incentives, and benefits that San Diego Community Power has to offer for everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.
Good evening. Chair Montero Adams, members of the committee. My name is Will Wiseman, Associate Director of Finance for the Capital Investment Plan. Joined the community power team this week. Prior to joining, I spent the last 10 years with the city of San Diego. Most recently as the financial operations manager over their financial reporting team. So I supported their annual financial reports, overhead cost rate development, grants administration, major enterprise budget. So to work with all of you and join the team. So thank you.
Welcome both to the team. Sandra, are there any items on the agenda to be withdrawn or reordered?
There, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up on the agenda is non-agenda public comments. Written public comments submitted before the committee meeting are emailed to all CAC members prior to the committee meeting and will be posted on the website at the beginning of this meeting. Sandra, do we have any non-agenda public comments?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
We will now move on to the consent agenda. The consent calendar contains items that can be approved as a package without discussion unless a CAC member or a member of the public requests that an item be removed for separate discussion and action. The CAC received staff reports for all items on the consent agenda, and staff provided an opportunity for questions and comments during briefings prior to this meeting. Today's consent agenda includes 6 items. Sandra, do we have any public comment on any of these items?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to remove any item from the consent agenda for a separate vote?
I would like to pull item 4, separate discussion.
Item 4, update on programs. Is that correct? Great. Do we have staff that would be able to speak to item 4?
Yes, we do. We have Colin online. 1 second.
And I believe that we need a vote to remove the item from the consent calendar.
No, you did it, you send calendar, but not including it. And then you take item number 4 as part of the writing.
Great, fantastic. Okay, with that in place, we will remove item 4 for separate discussion. And I request a motion to approve the consent calendar items 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6.
So moved.
Second. And Sandra, please call it.
Committee member Gonzalez.
Aye.
Committee member Hammond. Committee member Hoyt. Committee member Anderson.
Aye.
Committee member Sumner. Committee member Santos. Committee member Emerson.
Aye.
Committee member Basilakis.
Aye.
Secretary Pike. Vice Chair Montero Adams.
Aye.
Committee member Hammond, can you hear us?
Hi, yeah, sorry, my browser crashed. Aye. Thank you.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair. And we have a hand up. Colin, would you like to say something? You can go ahead and unmute yourself. Thanks for.
No, apologies, I was making myself available for the item that got pulled from consent.
Thank you very much, Colin. Great, well, that motion passes. We will now move forward with the agenda. Would we like to start with item 4? Perfect. Great, well, we will start with item number 4, which is titled update on programs. Colin, you made yourself available to speak on this item, if you wouldn't mind. Do we want to start with questions? Please.
Yes, under item 4, I just wanted to touch on the solar and energy storage programs with some questions and clarifications. Could I get an update on the vendor status that you were interviewing? Has it been selected? Are you still going through the interview process? Is one of my questions.
Yeah, sure. Member Emerson, I believe you're referencing the interview, or sorry, the procurement for community workshops for the solar
Yes.
battery savings program. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, we're still in contracting, so we're not able to. We haven't selected a vendor formally yet. We haven't signed a contract yet, so nothing to report yet there.
Okay, and then separately, you have a lot of good details on the number of applications and what's been approved, installed and activated, so I appreciate all those details. It does mention that 69% of the applicants are for market rate customers. So that means 30% are for, what's the correct term? The non-market rate, is there a better?
Community of concern is a term that
Community of
Community Power
concern.
uses.
And so related to that, I would be interested in having a little bit more breakdown on which communities that are actually taking advantage of that, which are not. And when the vendor, or even before the vendor is selected for the workshops, what are the plans or the manner to increase those percentages in the different communities? For example, will they be meeting with city council members one-on-one to find out what the city council members thought would be beneficial in the workshops? Or working with community advisory committee members to discuss options? So those are the kind of questions, if in the future, if they can put a little bit more detail on the breakdown for the communities of concerns, I would appreciate that and get some feedback on matters of increasing those numbers, those percentages.
Yeah, I absolutely happy to address a few of your questions now. And I think it warrants a more detailed presentation, which we can commit to bring to the next CAC meeting. And we'll bring Emily Fisher, who's the lead on this for Community Power. But I can say, in a couple of your points, we initially had not intended for the the vendor who we're bringing on, or the partner, is really going to help us with community engagement events. So that is what the scope that we've engaged with them on. So working with elected officials is not part of the scope. It's not what we had envisioned. That's not to say that we couldn't adapt or expand. But just to respond to your question about engaging with council members specifically, that wasn't intended.
Well, but I think that they don't want to be blind and go into a community without any good concept on how to be the most
yeah.
effective in the workshops. So that's why I was suggesting maybe they touch base with city council members or CAC members in those communities. And they shouldn't put blindfolds on and just jump into a workshop without thinking how the best to address. So I think it should give it some extra thought, and I would be interested to get some feedback as you finalize your scope and discussions with the vendor for those workshops.
Of course, understood. Just so you feel comfortable with the direction we're heading, we are working very closely with our public affairs team and marketing communications folks inside that team, as well as the community engagement folks in that team. Zio Malas, who's there tonight with you all. So we definitely have our experts at Community Power informing the outreach strategy. And so, if and when we need to engage with elected officials, we definitely will. But we've got very accomplished, qualified folks who are helping us inform that strategy. But we can speak more to that when we bring a full item on SPS and the customer workshops to the next CSE meeting, which I believe would be coming up in June, since we're skipping the May meeting.
Okay, look forward to it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the questions.
Any additional questions, Member Emerson? With this item not needing a vote, this will be received or taken as a receive and file item. No further action is needed.
It's part of the, you still,
Sorry.
you still.
I move this separate concept number 3, item 4.
Okay.
And Simon, maybe he's called.
Committee member Gonzalez.
Aye.
Committee member Hammond.
Aye.
Committee member Hoyt. Committee member Anderson.
Aye.
Committee member Santos. Committee member Emerson.
Aye.
Committee member Vasilakis.
Aye.
Secretary Pike. Vice Chair Montero Adams. Motion carries.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to the regular agenda, starting with item number 7, Finance Department updates. As a reminder to members, you may ask staff clarifying questions during the presentation, but I kindly ask that we wait until the end of the presentation for a full item discussion. Joining us today, we have Jeb Spengler, Senior Strategic Finance Manager.
Yep. Vice Chair, members of the committee, Jeb Spengler, Senior Strategic Finance Manager and Interim Treasurer at Community Power. I'm here today with a broad finance department update. Finance department has been quite busy for the last 3 to 4 months, and we felt this was just a good opportunity now that a few of our major initiatives have wrapped up to bring forth some of the results and just some of the good work that we're trying to do for customers. And so within the staff report, I've outlined 5 major initiatives that we've walked through. The first of which is we just recently wrapped up our 3rd clean energy prepayment bond transaction. This was a $687 million transaction that ultimately prepays for 30 years of energy through an initial 10-year term. This is one of the biggest tools we have in our toolbox in order to lower customer costs through reduced cost of energy. This is a program where we assign contracts through power purchase agreements that we have into a prepay transaction and ultimately get a discount on the price that we're paying for that energy. This being the 3rd transaction, I've highlighted total savings to date through the 3 transactions. This graph is a little updated from the one that's in the staff report. I know there's a question on the board briefing with respect to rebates being separate for prepaid 3. This chart now outlines the various savings that we get from both the energy component as well as the annual rebates on all 3 transactions over time. We're proud of the fact that we are now up to $20 million in annual savings starting in 2030, 2031. This prepaid 3 transaction, we're anticipating $43 million in total savings to be spread out over the first 10 years through 2035, which equates to approximately $4.3 million annually. Through this prepaid transaction, the energy flows will begin in September of this year, and that's when the savings start on a monthly basis. The next major initiative, and I know some of you have heard this, I think last month, I believe Jack might have brought this to your attention. We're proud to announce that we now have a public investment grade credit rating. It's an A stable outlook through S&P Global Ratings. This is it generally reflects the strong financial discipline, which includes our healthy reserves, our careful rate setting, and just our conservative risk management. For importance for the Customer Community Advisory Committee, this really impacts our ability to lower costs for customers. We do this through additional negotiation tools. We get better pricing on our contracts. We have a better ability to go to counterparties and say, look at our financial strength. We now have an externally validated company that's looking at our financials and our risk practices. And ultimately that enhances our ability to get better pricing for everything that we procure, from energy to non-energy type items. So this was a major initiative that we're proud of. We're about 1.5 years ahead of schedule from when we thought we would actually obtain this. So we had heard, I can't verify this, but I heard we're the youngest CCA to actually get this public credit rating. So we're very proud of this, and hopefully you'll recognize the benefit through reduced costs. So back in December, we had, this is item 3. Back in December, we had come to the CAC, the FRMC, and the board with an updated financial reserves policy. You may recall Tim, my colleague Tim and I, we did this deep dive into the risk-based analysis that set the financial reserve thresholds. This was a deep dive into what PCIA is and market price benchmark volatilities. And that ultimately informed where we set our new reserves targets. Through those new reserve targets, we set 3 different threshold amounts, the minimum being 180 days cash on hand, the new target being 225 days cash on hand, and ultimately an upper threshold amount that we would ultimately not set rates to exceed that amount of 270 days cash on hand. Pleased to report that through the December 31st Treasury report that was just presented to the board last month, we are at the target of 225 days cash on hand, which is, again, a little ahead of schedule, but we're proud that we're at that target. This is impactful in a number of ways, but item 4 is where it'll become more apparent as to why this is good news. Just as a reminder, maintaining reserves helps us avoid sudden rate increases and supports just long-term affordability, and provides a risk management tool for the organization. Item number 4 is our rate stabilization reserve policy, which was just board adopted this last month. The rate stabilization policy is designed to set aside funds in years of strength that can then be used in years of, I'll say, weakness, or where there's volatility that we could address through a pool of reserves that has been specially designated for the use of those reserves. So this rate stabilization policy, it's intended to smooth rates out over time. It's not intended to be a long-term mechanism that could be used as an ongoing device in lieu of increasing rates to maintain our stability. It is intended to basically smooth rates out over time and recognize, or I'm sorry, be used to basically manage ongoing volatility versus kind of big shocks that our other pot of reserves are intended to be used for. So this is more kind of ongoing volatility, general swings in the market that we see, cyclical swings that occur a year or two. It's intended to address those types of situations. we've designed this, if you go back to our financial reserves policy that was passed in December, we call out specifically the pot of money that would be set aside for rate stabilization reserve specifically. In that pot, it would be the difference between 225-day target and our upper threshold, 270 days cash on hand, which equates to 45 days, or in dollar terms, about $125 million. That $125 million is roughly equivalent to 30% of the market price benchmark volatility risk, which is our single biggest risk that we have as an agency. It's the one that can fluctuate the most and impacts our costs more than any other cost of the agency. That $125 million is also equivalent to approximately 10% of operating revenues or 12% of operating expenses. Why those numbers are important is if we've done a deep dive of other community choice aggregators across the state, and those are roughly the same metrics that they use for their sizing purposes. It's all within kind of the same bandwidth. A rough timeline of how a rate stabilization reserve works. Staff will continue to monitor our reserve position through the end of this fiscal year, which ends June 30, 2026. As I just mentioned, we are right at our target reserve of 225 days cash on hand. If you look at our historical financial performance, our reserves are typically pretty flat to slightly declining through the first 2 to 3, sometimes 4 months of the year, before they start to gradually increase towards the end of the year when we start collecting after summer rates. This year is a little different with the different rate impacts of basically the different rates that occur throughout the year will largely impact how we collect reserves throughout the year. So we're still monitoring how that will ultimately impact financial position this year. But our intention is there could be reserves above the 225 days cash before the end of this fiscal year that we could designate into the rate stabilization reserve. So we will make that determination over the next 2 months. If there is money that can be set aside, it's an accounting mechanism where money is actually removed from our net position in this fiscal year, and then it is recognized in the year that you intend to use it. And because we have to be nimble on the front end with being able to designate funds, that is a staff decision that ultimately our CEO will designate those funds as rate stabilization reserves. And then it would be used in alignment with our rate setting process in January. And that would be basically a pool of money that the rates team and our CEO would present to the board and say, our rates are this, and we intend to use this amount of rate stabilization reserves. So that's how they would work. Item 5 is just a quick update on our fiscal year 26-27 budget process. We intend to present a department by department analysis for both the FRMC, the board, and then the CAC late May, early June. This process just ensures you all have comfort with our spending discipline, our focus on affordability, and our long-term sustainability. Just in closing, every one of these initiatives is about the same goal. It's protecting customers from volatility, managing dollars responsibly, and keeping energy affordable over the long term. And that wraps up my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Sandra, do we have any public comment on this?
Good enough, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I will now turn it over to the CAC members. Member Anderson.
Yes, first of all, thanks for a good, clear presentation. And for what looks to be a very reasonable reserve policy of 225 days. You alluded to what I'm going to ask about briefly at the conclusion. Would you increase it above 225 days? And how would you make that determination to increase the safety and the solvency of the organization versus using that additional money beyond 225 for other projects such as lower rates or community outreach or whatever?
So I think there might be 2 questions in there.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah. So let me see if I can address at least some of those questions, and maybe if I don't address your question.
Right.
So the 225 days was set in December after a good year's worth of risk-based analysis that we did. If we could go back and we present kind of how that analysis shaped up, but it was ultimately different buckets. So we did a bottom-up approach for all of our risks. We calculated what our biggest risks are. We determined, it's unlikely that all of these risks are going to happen at the exact same time. But even if some of them happened at the exact same time, ultimately our risk was in the realm of $500 million to $625 million of total potential risk to the agency if certain PCI market prices swing one way. There's a number of events that could happen that we could face a very large deficit in that case, and that's what those reserves are there for. It's our intention that analysis to review that will happen at least annually, if not more frequently. There's going to be additional risk operating committee type presentations that go to our FRMC. The cadence for those will happen over the next month or so. It's our intention to start showing some of the kind of ongoing volatility that might impact our future review of those reserve levels. But at this point in time, as of at least December, that was the risk that was calculated at that time. And we will continue to kind of monitor that and determine whether or not that's the right number.
Well, let's just hypothetically say 280-day reserve gives you more safety than a 225-day reserve should some of these unforeseen circumstances happen. Is there a desire to go beyond the 225, or is that viewed as a minimum or a sufficient threshold?
So we had set the minimum at the 180 days, and we really see that as the minimum for a number of reasons, which is both risk-based, financial stability-based. We now have a public credit rating. If you compare us to our peers, which is now easier to do in a very public setting, the 180 days really is a threshold that a lot of CCAs have identified as kind of the minimum operating reserve you would want to maintain. I think we're all very aware of the optics of having too much reserves and the trade-off of holding reserves versus being able to lower rates. I think we've been over the last 5 years, I've only been here for a year, but we've been in a trajectory of trying to build our reserves to maintain financial stability and cover our known risks. It's comforting to me as a newer employee, as a community power customer myself, that that plane is starting to level off, and now we're in a maintenance mode where we can continue to monitor what reserves need to be based on risks as they develop, but then also now address customer concerns with rates by being able to use rate stabilization reserves that are above kind of what we've identified as the biggest risks. And I know our rates team is very excited to, so we've done, finance department has done this with, in conjunction with our rates team. They're very excited to have this additional tool in their toolbox to be able to set aside money now that can be used for the next rate saving cycle. Or if next year looks like it could be another good year in terms of market prices, and we're still able to have a nice value discount. Maybe we don't need it next year. Maybe we need it the following year because market prices are dropping, and that's going to impact us more in 28. But we're excited to have these discussions. Yeah. So
Thanks.
yeah, good question. Thank you.
My first comment is just kind of a procedural one. I think you've heard me say this before, but it really would be nice to have opportunity as this committee that's been in before the board hears the item. Last meeting was the project labor agreement, and in this case, I think this update, but rate stabilization in particular, I think would have been juicy to discuss, and I have some notions on it. But not to beat a dead horse. I know it could come up again for a conversation in the future. But my positive comment is that it's not lost on me that on all of these updates, it is progress towards being able to offer greater savings and value to the ratepayers. You can't, if you're not a functioning fiscally solvent agency, you can't save money for the ratepayers. That being said, with the rate stabilization reserves, I think it would have been interesting conversation to see if we could have, if it could have been more defined how it could serve as a shock absorber rather than I understand the accounting method of setting it aside. And this is a pool, it's 125 million. When we have those monies available, we will be setting aside. And when it's triggered by a reserve mechanism, then we could use it. But for example, what's the reserve event? Is there like a defined year over year or value proposition change that would trigger the conversation?
So the staff report that was included in the board lists a few, it's got quite a bit more detail.
It describes them, but there's not like numbers, right? It's not like if it's going to be a 6% rate, we have this conversation.
Correct. And I think that's vague for a reason. I think that's open for discussion. Ultimately, I think one of the reasons why maybe that policy didn't specifically come to the CAC is because it really is a standalone policy that is more about the accounting mechanism device. It's somewhat, the terms of the policy itself dictates how the deferral and recognition happens is really just an accounting mechanism. So I think we had comfort that the reserve policy that we brought forth in December at that time had discussed that the threshold amount of the 45 days, it had been included within that kind of 225 to 270.
Understood.
But yeah, so I don't have a great reason why that one didn't particularly come back. I know not all policies make it to the CAC in advance. But with that in mind, I think I will be at least more cognizant of future policies that might come out of the finance department. And we do have a review of policies now on an annual basis. So I think that's been an ongoing thing. But as we review and update our policies on at least an annual basis, it's fresh in my mind that we will come back.
And to piggyback on Reverend Anderson's question on the threshold that goes up, and we do it about 2000, 1 year it's 300 days reserve funds. Does that increase the ability to use these funds as a shock absorber? Will that number, the amount that's set aside is the reserve? That's just a rate stabilization eventually increase as well.
It could. We do have the kind of max balance of 125 days that could be set aside, and some of that again is more a result of the accounting nuance of when you defer. If you were to defer 125 million in a given year, you might end up impacting certain financial covenants that become problematic elsewhere. So it's the accounting mechanism has kind of secondary effects of other just financial things that we have to pay attention to, as does even the recognition. You would have wild swings in your financial position when your net position decreases by 125 and then is recognized in that it's like the next year of 125. But to answer your question, funds can be designated as rate stabilization funds, but they could also be used for other purposes.
And I promise that I wouldn't beat a dead horse. So this will be around. This will be my last comment. But especially if this was still to go to the board, I think I would have focused on how limiting the opportunity is just to use that and not automatically have a conversation about the greater reserves. Because if 180 days is by some agencies considered sufficient, that difference when we hit 270, that's 90 days difference that should also be part of the conversation. And the second is probably also an accounting reason for repaying it within 2 to 4 years. But I would have commented that seems very stringent, depending on the climate of those 2 to 4 years. Seems like you're tying your hands and not allowing yourself to have some of those savings and keep the phasing in process slower for ratepayers.
We added the words "if feasible" at the very end of the 2 to 4. The 2 to 4 years more came from if you there's a presentation where it showed basically natural gas prices and the cyclical nature of natural gas prices and its impact on energy prices. And we've determined that it's really kind of 2 to 4 year swings in market prices that you're trying to address, where you're potentially within a 2-year window where you're trying to use the money, but then have the ability to kind of recoup those funds over another 2 years. I think that was kind of the intention of that.
I appreciate the conservative approach. I'm appreciative of the fact that we're offering our customers protection and savings in the instance of wild swings in the energy market. I think just given the current geopolitical and economic environment, which will likely continue into early 2030s, this is a very prudent approach. Now, I'm also someone that would love to see more investments in community clean energy grant programs and other fun things. But given the shocks and the volatility, I think that having that cash on hand is incredibly important to stabilize and to showcase to customers that, no, we've thought ahead strategically, carefully, and when things stabilize, sure, we can deploy. Also, congratulations on getting that bond rating a year and a half ahead. That was definitely something I'm very proud of the agency for. So thank you. This is very heartening to hear.
Thanks for the presentation. And since I'm not the financial background, I need for clarification. And when you say prepaid savings, and maybe you explain some of the things more about it, you refresh it. Like I'm signing up for my future when I've gone, acclimation, like cremation, but using a water process for when I've gone for cremation. I can prepay that, but I don't save anything, except that in the future, the price might have gone up. So I may save in the future, but I don't save now. So how do you, when you prepay the bonds, and how do you save? Can you just go over that? Because I have a clear understanding.
The general mechanism is you're prepaying for energy. So we're providing a lump sum payment of, in this case, $687 million to prepay for 30 years of energy.
What does that go?
There's a whole chart, lots of boxes and arrows that would get a little confusing, but ultimately it goes to the energy provider. It just goes to a taxable entity, a taxable corporate entity. But through this mechanism, we end up getting energy at a discount. So we get a fixed discount to an indexed rate energy power purchase agreement. And so we will get, just for instance, say 60,000 megawatt hours a month, and we'll get a $10 a month per megawatt hour discount.
And it's a tax benefit.
So we sell it. It is ultimately a tax exempt. The difference of tax exempt and taxable rates, because we are
You
prepaying.
explained this before.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We are prepaying on a tax exempt basis because we're a tax exempt entity. And there's a taxable entity on the other side who is offsetting their cost of capital through basically a lower cost of funds for them. So it's a win-win for both.
You're refreshing my memory. Okay.
I did have another quick series of questions specific to the timeline for section 5, the FY27 budgetary process. You mentioned that in May and June, staff provided a recommendation as to how much funds moves to this rate stabilization fund. Is the idea to zero out and begin a fiscal year with a reserve of 225 days, or is that a general aim and is dependent upon staff recommendation year-to-year basis?
Yeah, so we will take into account the latest filings that we have from external agencies that might inform our pro forma financial statements for the rest of the year and into 27. We're doing a lot of work on that right now, actually, of reviewing what our pro forma looks like through the end of this year. So we'll have a better sense as to what the remainder of this year is, plus what rates might look like in January of 27 over the next month or so. So yeah, ultimately, we will take into account kind of what our 6 to 12 month outlook looks like before we make the determination this fiscal year.
This being the first year that both the rate stabilization fund and the new metrics for the reserves are in place, I imagine there's going to be some, learning opportunities as we are kind of working on two different timelines, one being the fiscal year, and it's mid-year, and one the rate setting, which is 6 months spread apart. How do you feel that those two components are going to play off against each other as you are predicting into the future? And then kind of a second question to that is, if I'm correct, the rate setting bakes into it an estimation as to how much reserves will be created in a fiscal year. Does that mean that the goal of the rate setting will be to shoot for that 270 by end of fiscal year and take into consideration the rate stabilization fund?
I'll address the second question first. Second question, we would not set rates to kind of hit that upper threshold. Our rates, without discussing with the rates team and everybody else and our executive team, I don't believe we would ever set rates to achieve the upper threshold. Really, that was basically to say we would not set rates to exceed the upper threshold.
Great.
Ultimately, our target is our target of 225 days cash on hand, and I think we would like to set rates where we'd be able to at least maintain that. If there's a reason to drop below that, we would hopefully not have to do that, but depending on the market conditions, there's the use of reserves is the use of reserves, and that's important. Your first question I love, because that is an issue, just the timing difference between the fiscal year and the calendar year. And calendar year is when the rates are set in January, and our fiscal year ends 6 months prior to that, and we have to make this determination. So we are, again, we look at performance and forward-looking energy costs on almost a daily basis, and it's presented both ways internally. Jack is laughing because he knows how I am. So it will be a learning opportunity. This will be the first time that we need to designate. We need to make a decision on something like this before the end of this fiscal year, and we close out our fiscal 26 books. Ultimately, I think mechanically it's not going to be very complicated. The biggest, I think, learning will be our use of our pro forma and our projections to determine how well or how much we could set aside in this fiscal year and use in the next rate setting cycle. I'm also hoping that if we continue to fine tune and improve financial forecasting, we'll have a better sense as to what 27 calendar year looks like for 27 rate setting. It's really early in the year to be determining that now. But I don't have a great answer other than you have a good question. And that is, it is something that I know that we've identified as being something that we need to learn how to do.
Yeah, I imagine it as being kind of looking into a crystal ball and hoping that you have the best view possible. But thank you. I just was wondering if there were any other components that I wasn't considering consideration. Any final questions? All right, well, in that case, Jeff, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. This is a receive and file item and no further action is needed. We will now move on to item 8, review draft local development strategy. I will turn it over to Lee Friedman, Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships.
Good evening, Vice Chair, Montero Adams, and committee members. And my name is Lee Friedman, Associate Director of Strategic Initiatives. I also want to introduce a colleague of mine, Morgan Adams, who is our Senior Local Development Manager, who's going to be splitting this presentation with me today. I'll go over the fun stuff, gets the hard stuff. And then I'll come back up after to take your questions. But Morgan, if you maybe just introduce yourself for a quick moment.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Vice Chair, committee members. Morgan Adams, Senior Manager of Local Renewable Development. So I'm part of the Power Services Procurement Team. The team is for buying power on behalf of the customers. Yeah, I've been here about 3 years, and I'm excited to be at the first CAC meeting.
Okay. All right. I'll leave that up. Well, tonight we're going to present for your feedback a draft of the local development strategy that the San Diego Community Power team has been working on. I want to just take a moment to thank Morgan, Andrea, Ashley, and other members of the San Diego Community Power team who have worked to put together this draft for your review and feedback. And I'd also like to thank the CAC Ad Hoc DER Committee, which previewed this document and gave some really good, valuable feedback. First things first, what is the purpose of a local development strategy? Well, we've set a strategic goal to achieve and procure 300 megawatts of distributed energy resources by 2035. Of that 300 megawatt goal, we split it into two tranches. One tranche of 150 megawatts we're trying to procure through the implementation of programmatic efforts like solar battery savings. And the other 150 megawatts, we're trying to reach the deployment of renewable energy resources through local procurement. And that's what this strategy is specifically speaking about. So this strategy is just about 150 megawatts that the power services team is looking to procure. We know that building local projects supports resource adequacy, reliability, resilience. It means local jobs, economic benefits staying in the communities. And honestly, since we were formed, a lot of our stakeholders are saying, this is what we expected from San Diego community, local development. And so we understand that. As we dive into this document, and you may have read it already, it is very high level, purposefully so. This is supposed to be a narrative document that really discusses at a high level what our thoughts are, our strategies are when it comes to local development. And I'd be remiss to say that we've been doing local development for years now. We just really haven't talked about it very much. So as you read through this document already and thinking, man, I wish I could know more about specific, development strategies, those are going to come. This is sort of, I would say, like the mothership, and then as we are developing specific initiatives, those will have their own associated strategies, which we'll bring back to the CAC and to the board for their review, because there are a lot of different ways we want to achieve this goal, and it's not a silver bullet approach. And I think that's what we're trying to show through the document. This is a thoughtful and drawn out holistic process to achieving these goals. So what does local mean? Because that's an important definition when you're talking about local development. For our purposes at San Diego Community Power, local means both San Diego County and Imperial County. And within San Diego County, we're also talking about the federally recognized tribes within San Diego County. As we'll discuss later in this presentation, the strategy focuses both on the potential deployment of front of the meter and behind the meter. And just so you know, any of this group generally knows the terminology here. But if you ever get lost, there's a glossary on the back of the document as well that explains all of the fun language we get to use. But we'll talk more detail about sort of that divide between front of the meter and behind the meter. And I want to state up front that this strategy really emphasizes specifically community scale development, which is typically sited closer to existing loads, existing infrastructure, which allows for faster deployment, fewer disruptions. Okay. So when we developed the strategy, we wanted to make sure we set a clear vision and associated guiding principles for how we approach local development. Our vision is to advance a portfolio of locally distributed energy resources that delivers clean, reliable, and affordable power. But I think it's just as important for us to talk about the guiding principles as well, because the principles of transparency, workforce development, ratepayer protection, equity, community benefit, these are critical as well. It probably doesn't take anybody here too much Googling to see how impactful development can be in a community. And we need to make sure we're taking a holistic approach to local development. And these principles are critical to ensuring, that we're the best possible stewards of the ratepayer funds that we receive. Okay, so there are many opportunities for local development, and it can be easy to get lost in the sauce of that. So we want to understand where the opportunities are, but also where the vulnerabilities are. And probably no surprise to this group that the development of local renewable energy resources is a complex process, and there are a lot of stakeholders. We've identified several vulnerabilities, grid interconnection, operational limitations, restricted resource valuation, more are listed in the strategy itself. And I think that it's probably fair to say, Gordon, correct me if I'm wrong, that, interconnection is probably far and away the most impactful to feasibility and one that we need to address as quickly as possible. And so we're trying to, we are also identifying opportunities on how to increase project viability and value. And that means addressing those challenges head on. So, direct engagement with SDG&E on mitigating cost prohibitive barriers to interconnection, engagement at the local and state level around advocacy for things that could support local development. And as we'll dive into a little later with Morgan, what are the other procurement vehicles that we should be exploring that get around some of these challenges as we're trying to navigate them. I think that it's important to state that the opportunities are also not uniform across the San Diego region, that different sectors provide different opportunities and have different challenges. But the strategy talks about how we as an agency need to do that sector analysis, and we can distinguish the opportunities for development across those different sectors. I don't think it comes as any surprise that a school district probably has different needs, opportunities, and challenges than a commercial and industrial potential market, right? A school district, has very unique opportunities because, schools in session for a certain number of hours during the day, generally when power is the cheapest. And then, they're out from 4 to 9 p.m. when power is most expensive. So finding ways that we could store, generate that power during the day, discharge it when the school doesn't necessarily need it because students are out of class in those 4 to 9 p.m. hours, it could be really beneficial to us and a boon to the schools as well. And so as opportunities are clarified through the analysis, we want to make sure that those opportunities also go through a holistic evaluation process. And so we talk about this, I think it's probably the first time we talk about it in a real narrative form in a public way, the Energy Proposal Evaluation Criteria, or EPEC. It's a framework that we use that really is a holistic framework to ensure that we're not just evaluating projects solely on price, but that we're looking on benefits like environmental impacts, job creation, and economic development. The full EPEC is listed in the document itself, so you can see, I think how thoughtful we are when it comes to project evaluation. Something that really doesn't get talked about enough is the critical importance of stakeholder and community engagement when it comes to local development. Again, I think we've seen examples of this even recently. If a community is adamantly opposed to development, that's a pretty hard and significant barrier to overcome. And so as an agency, we need to be thoughtful about the way that local development occurs in our region. And specifically, we think that the developer needs to take on some more of these responsibilities as well. So early engagement with communities, identifying when feasible. Early engagement with communities, identifying the proper stakeholders, supporting coordination, coalition building, really sets a strong foundation for these projects to be successful. Nobody likes a surprise, even if it's something positive like a local resource. If the first time you hear about it is on Nextdoor and somebody is very angry about it, that can sour the experience right then and there, right? So it's critical that that as we're doing local development, we're being thoughtful and aware of how these projects impact the communities that they're in, and that we are expecting our developers to be good community stewards. We have a responsibility here as well. So we talk about what some of the developer responsibilities are for outreach engagement, when it's appropriate. But we also have our own responsibilities as a public agency, and that's setting clear engagement expectations, providing transparency around our processes so people understand how these projects are going through our own internal process. We want to make sure that we're serving as a point of contact for policy procurement program questions, and facilitating some of these connections between potential developers and community stakeholders, or educating our own member agency staff, whether that's electeds or staff at development service departments, permitting authorities, things of that nature. And then, of course, maintain our own internal coordination to ensure early awareness of projects and potential issues. It's always better to make sure that we are being thoughtful ourselves about how we are presented in the community. So I'm going to turn it over to Morgan now, who gets to dive into the fun stuff, the ways by which local development can be accomplished, And I'll come back at the end to take any of your questions.
Thanks, Lee. Great, thanks. So I just wanted to spend some time just kind of sharing some of the procurement pathways that are available to us and sort of some of the distinguishing features. I think the first distinction I want to make is between front of the meter and behind the meter procurement. At a very just sort of simple technical distinction that just has to do with whether a solar project or a battery is connected directly to the grid, so front of the meter, or is it behind a customer's meter, right? So like a typical, home or business system that is sort of interconnected behind the meter. So, technically they look very, very similar, but from a procurement perspective, they're different species. They have very different characteristics, different things to consider. So let me just sort of highlight some of those here. So front of the meter procurement, this is the most common ways any kind of utility or CCA would procure. Someone gets his land, builds a project, maybe even leases a rooftop, installs that in front of the meter. It's directly connected to the grid. We pay that developer, and how we receive benefit from that is through scheduling that into the CAISO market. We get, paid for the energy we're selling into the market, for the ancillary services, and then it's also helping us meet our compliance requirements, the resource adequacy requirements. And that's really where we get the benefits from these projects. Historically speaking, these are generally larger projects. They certainly can be. That's not to say other behind the meter projects can't be large too, but these are typically larger. So in theory, we could meet goals by, procuring from less projects, a couple whoppers and, go a long way. The challenges with front of the meter tend to be interconnection, I'd say, is the biggest constraint. It's really hard to get these projects approved to interconnect just because the grid is it's so constrained. So it's either impossible or it comes with $1 million of upgrades. And then sort of related to that, but a little bit different, is deliverability. That's the process by which these projects are assigned resource adequacy value. And that's a separate study process by the CAISO. And with that, we get some RA compliance value. And without that, we get nothing. I mean, we still get the energy benefits, but we don't get any of the resource adequacy benefits. So these are some of the constraints that we have been identifying and are trying to help address directly. Okay, behind the meter. So this is, think projects that are sited at our customers' locations. They're intertied sort of behind their utility meter. These customers are now really just acting as a site host. They're hosting a project that really is for our sort of direct purchase and benefit. Why do this? Well, projects that are interconnected behind the meter go through a whole different interconnection process than the sort of troublesome one that I talked about from the meter. It's generally easier, it's cheaper, it's quicker. It's what all the homes and businesses go through to interconnect their projects. It just comes with lower risk and more certainty and less cost. So interconnection is one of the big benefits of behind the meter. I was talking about resource adequacy just now and how it requires this deliverability study. And that's how we get RA value, but the RA value also kind of decreases over the years through these, D-rate factors. And with behind the meter projects, we get that resource adequacy value just by the mere nature that the fact that we are modifying our own load. So we're, because the RA compliance obligations that we have, they are based directly on our load, right? So we have load that determines what our RA obligations are. If we can reduce and shape our load, then we even get more direct benefits from that RA. In addition, there's additional co-benefits that can be through behind the meter projects, such as providing resilience for projects that now have batteries. And so if there's an outage, they can potentially get backup power. A couple of challenges, because these are sited behind our customers' meters, this only works for our customer sites. They also need to remain our customer. And we can only size a project as big as their utility load. We can't, go to a warehouse in Otay that only consumes a little bit of power and put on a massive project because they need the load to support it. Otherwise, they won't get the interconnection from SDG&E. And then another challenge, just to note, because these projects are behind the meter, the site host will have a lower bill from SDG&E. And so this introduces the whole cost shift debate or challenge, which is that SDG&E now has lower revenues, and they say that this, now they're sort of what it costs them to operate the grid needs to be spread out across fewer electrons that are being charged for the grid. And so that's just a risk worth noting. That's basically a factor. Any behind the meter project has this cost shift debate attached to it. Okay, so I want to touch briefly on feed-in tariff and solar advantage. These are not distinct from front or behind the meter per se, but they are vehicles nonetheless. They're also programs that we serve, and they're certainly worth talking about. So a feed-in tariff, it is really a more simplified, streamlined contract with like a pre-published rate. Hey, if you can, if you have a project that you want to build, we have some extra land, and you can meet these criteria, you can sell to us, Community Power, at this sort of pre-prescribed rate. These are both of these programs and procurements are both front of the meter only. So they're still sort of confronted with those front of the meter challenges. So that's sort of a feed-in tariff. We have one, we've had one for years. It's not gotten a ton of engagement, frankly, because of these reasons that I was just talking about. These interconnection challenges, these cost challenges have made the price point challenging. Solar Advantage, otherwise known as our DAC-GT program. This is our CPUC program that offers 20% bill discounts to low-income residences in our communities. And it's done through front-of-the-meter procurement. Importantly, I'll note that those bill discounts, as well as anything that we're procuring through that's sort of above market, the CPUC subsidizes us for that. So it's a great program. We love it. We've run 2 solicitations today. We have a 3rd one that we're expected, hoping to run starting this spring. Okay, public-private partnerships. This pathway is really just to sort of capture some of the more, potentially complex projects or ones that are more capital intensive that really involve some of our public partnerships that can be, partnering with the U.S. military or large institutional campuses. Often these projects will leverage philanthropic or grants or private capital even. And so this is something that we're always working on, is like trying to develop more partnerships with water districts, school districts, the military, et cetera. Okay, so I just wanted to end here with noting some of the short and midterm priorities that we have. So as Lee noted, we are, direct conversation with SDG&E to try to address some of these issues related to interconnection, related to deliverability, to the extent we can sort of make some of those obstacles, clear some of those obstacles that are sort of challenging in some of these, particularly front of the meter projects. In the meantime, we are developing a behind the meter procurement strategy that will help sort of, avoid and mitigate some of these other challenges and risks. But we are still, selectively, pursuing front of the meter opportunities that make sense to the agency, and again, are continually working with our public partners, those complex opportunities that provide benefits to the community. So proactively, here's the kind of, here's what some of the things that we're doing. Procurement triage, I'll call it. So early on in development opportunities, really get a sense of, hey, you have some land, let's talk, with your landowner or your developer. What are the best pathways that might be available for you? Oh, you're in a disadvantaged community. Well, then you should really participate in our DAC-GT procurement program. Working on new procurement pathways and behind the meter. We're also working with a consultant to develop a heat map to essentially figure out what areas of the county are more viable for development and for interconnection so that we can know where to focus. That's a short-term priority for us. And then, continuing to educate our, decision makers and stakeholders. And because policy is such a big part of the enablement of these different procurement strategies, we're working closely with, statewide agencies, the CPUC, just to make sure that we have a sufficient landscape to make these programs work.
All right, that wraps up our presentation. I really appreciate your time tonight and answer any questions you have.
Fantastic. That was amazing. Before we go to questions, Sandra, do we have any public comment on this item?
No, Mr. Chair.
I will now turn it over to CAC members for comments and questions. Member Vasilakis.
Thank you for this plan. I really appreciate the level of detail at this stage. I like the idea of the heat map. I do wonder, as you drill deeper, because we're not that phase yet, having conversations with all member agencies, really following the climate action plans. So they're, understanding like, you want to build your renewables. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, is this a more of a procurement opportunity, given there's a lot of higher interconnected opportunities within your jurisdiction, or are we going to have to more in programs? So you're already thinking strategically further down the line. I think that engaged, and you get the community engaged early on to say like, well, we already have a consensus about what the opportunity is in La Mesa versus Imperial Beach.
Absolutely. And although we can't dive into it too deep right now, we are having discussions with our member agencies about, because they have a lot of their own municipal property that has a lot of opportunity. So we're engaging with with our member agencies specifically around that and see a lot of opportunity there. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for identifying the need to engage with. Sorry, just want to say thank you for identifying the need to engage with community groups first. As a planning board member, I can tell you there's been projects that have done that and that have not, and the ones that have not have always been the ones I voted against.
Yes. Yeah. Early engagement is critical. Transparency is critical.
He keeps telling me that.
As somebody who's been in front of a lot of planning boards.
He's right.
I thank you for a very detailed report and for your glossary, which was quite illuminating.
Yes.
Over and over again in these meetings, the issue of direct access power comes up, which is an alternative to either community power or SDG&E. What is the incentive for a developer of electrical project to sell to you versus through a direct access scheme?
Well, I know that direct access is capped, right? So there is only so much that those potential load serving entities could procure. But
so there's a limit to the amount of direct access.
Yeah, that direct access.
The direct access to customer.
Yeah,
There's what?
There's no new direct access
It's a
customers.
legacy.
So that's a legacy thing.
Yeah.
And who are the direct access customers? Large institutions?
Yeah, generally large institutions, large campuses. I probably could rattle off come off the top of my head, but think of your largest institutions in and around San Diego. Those are probably your direct access customers.
And do they get a better deal from their direct access contract than they would from San Diego Community Power?
Well, direct access contracts are negotiated third-party contracts. You don't necessarily have insight into what rates they are paying. I will say this, though, when it comes to renewable content and affordability, I don't think you could beat San Diego Community Power. Direct access historically, and I don't know for sure, but historically tended to be less expensive because it was significantly less renewable. They didn't have to meet the state mandated.
So it's for oil and coal and natural gas?
Right. So it used to be a lower content for renewable, which brought down the price. But, I think that, when it comes to, specifically local development,
even if there's a customer who is direct access, but they are interested in potentially developing on their site or on their property, doesn't preclude us from having conversations.
I've got another whole line of questions, but I'll defer to someone else. Okay, hypothetically, let's say I'm a warehouse developer in Otay Mesa.
Yes.
And I've got a giant warehouse development project with hundreds of thousands of square foot rooftop. And I want to sell energy to San Diego Community Power. But I also I might have one warehouse that's refrigerated.
Yeah.
And I might have other warehouses that have electric trucks. So some of the power from that big set of solar arrays is going to go for my own personal use. And then the rest of it would be sold to San Diego Community. Is that in front of the meter or behind the meter?
Yeah, it's all those things. You could kind of put together whatever sort of so you could have a project where part of that is sort of behind the meter to offset your own load, but then you also commission, or you also, we also do a big array that's sort of sold in front of the meter, or there could.
But you'd have to decide what percentage you're going to use for your own personal use and how much you're going to sell to San Diego Community Power, or could that vary?
The short answer is anything's potentially possible. Like, yes, ultimately, like you need to decide.
You as a developer.
Yes, you as a developer, like what, explore the different options. Like, okay, if I wanted to serve we build enough solar for half of my load, but then I have enough capacity that I don't need it, or it doesn't make sense, and want to sell to us. Right. That's sort of some, that's talking about these behind the meter procurement strategies. That's the kind of things that we're thinking about. Yeah.
So this is not purely hypothetical, because I have I'm in litigation with a major developer that we're trying to have solar arrays on all their roofs, and it keeps coming up as to whether San Diego Community Power would be a likely customer. And because you have a revolving request, they would just apply for that, and then we'd see.
Exactly.
And there's no way you would they apply for that before the array is built or after?
Before the array is built.
Okay, so they can do the deal before they start building the solar.
Yes, they probably should. I mean,
yeah, right.
They could lay the panels and then decide how they want to do it, but I wouldn't recommend that.
Yes.
When you want to figure out how much do I want to interconnect with SDG&E behind the meter versus front of the meter, you kind of want to know those things before you get too far.
Yeah. So Sierra Club has a potential suit against these, and we've been in 5 years of negotiation to hammer out a deal. So stay tuned. We'll be back in touch with you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other thoughts? Member Emerson?
I appreciate, Lee, you had a lot of enthusiasm.
Enthusiastic.
And you said you was going to have the fun part, but you got a little serious. I like that you guys have this, enthusiasm for what you're going to be doing. And I think you're going to find solutions. I just feel that from what your talks are about. And so I just really wanted to say that up front, and I enjoyed hearing your thoughts and your enthusiasm. Let me see if I have my question. Okay, microgrids. Those are part of the behind the meter.
What can they be?
They can be
Either or. Is there, would there be a push for microgrids, or
You're just going to wait and see what
you do, or?
That's so there are different microgrids. When we've spoken with some potential microgrid developers and communities and trying to think through ways that we could engage with those. And those are both, those are typically the front of the meter. So it's called a microgrid incentive program, I think MIP. It's an IOU front of the meter program. And that in those cases, in that sort of scenario would be like there's a big solar array and a battery, and we are purchasing the attributes from that on a day-to-day basis like we typically would. But then if there's need for the grid to, there's an outage or something, then that microgrid would just serve the community in essence and be used by them. So that's certainly possible. There are other ways if someone wanted to do a behind the meter microgrid. I mean, this behind the meter procurement strategy that I'm talking about would enable us to basically commission projects at customer sites that we would really be buying the power from. But this is like one of the benefits to them is that if there was an outage, then they're getting that backup power. So yes to both. I'd say behind the meter are probably a little bit more straightforward because you're not going through like a SDG&E, incentive program.
That leads me to the other question, interconnection, which you mentioned is one of the challenges in working with San Diego County Electric and making it happen. New infrastructure is needed sometimes. So, but my question is, the regulatory group isn't represented here today, but do we need new legislation to make that easier for these interconnect? We need to ask our state legislators to change, or is that a national or the federal decision, or there's something we can do on the state level?
I think that's probably a good question for us to take back and speak with our regulatory and legislative team and get back to you on that.
If there's something we can kind of encourage a change to, let us know. We participate in that proposal. So you're working with cities and their caps. And I thought you're thinking how to push them for the cost shift. School districts, I think that's the next one I did try to take advantage. I know one school district that put in air conditioning, which means they're going to use more electricity, but they're not putting any solar. And then maybe there's some potential.
Yeah, there's some really interesting with fleet electrification too for school districts. Electric buses are becoming more popular, and so we're see a lot of opportunity
now. See if we can put energy back in. Okay, well, thank you, and continue to be having fun and enthusiasm for the solution.
Thank you so much.
Seeing no other comments, I just had a quick question. This was at the beginning of the presentation, so I truly apologize if I missed it. The goal is for 150 megawatts to come through the distributed energy resources.
So 300 megawatts total for distributed energy resources, split into 150 megawatts, which Morgan's gonna be responsible for, and 150 megawatts for our programmatic efforts. So that would be like solar battery savings and those types of programs.
And then this policy is coming in first because none of that 150 has been built yet, or has some of that already started? So are we at the 0 point, or has there already been some of those megawatts allocated?
Some of the megawatts have been contracted. There's been no broken ground yet on that, the contract.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for the presentation. This is fantastic. This is a receive and file item and no further action is needed. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. We will now move on to our standing items. Discussion of potential agenda items for board of director meetings. As a reminder, the CAC may suggest agenda items for a board of directors meeting agenda by communicating with the CAC chair and designated community power staff before and or after a regular CAC meeting. If suggested at this time, there shall be no discussion or action by the CAC unless the item has been included on the CAC agenda. Do any of our CAC members have recommendations on potential items for our board of directors? Seeing no recommendations, I'll move on to committee member announcements. Do any of our CAC members have items they'd like to share today?
First, people, Waltera. She's got here.
I was gonna point out that member Hammond had sent out an email. Yes, but thank you very much. That email has been distributed to all of the CAC members.
You know, I looked for it, but I couldn't find it in the trail of email. So what's the announcement? Pickleball.
I don't have it off the top of my head.
There's
It's
a
the annual
fundraiser tournament. I think it's at Barnes, if I'm remembering, and it's a benefit.
close the gap with one of the grantees that is building up a new project.
Wire attached to the.
I couldn't find it, you know, mixed up in all the other trailers, I don't know.
Let's keep going.
You can just send just that, and maybe it won't get me back. Somehow they stack on the top of each other somehow.
Any other announcements? Please.
Oh, this is my last CAC meeting. So, thank you. I really appreciate the time. I took a picture meeting, so, and there's no May meeting. That's huge. Yes. No, I just wanted to say goodbye, and I really appreciate all this, brain power and trust. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Are you going to work for your birthday? Is that what's happening?
No, I'm actually.
Okay, well, I will share two quick, oh, please.
Just as a personal thing that I found out about, you know, you heard me mention aquamation, paying for that in advance. That's instead of fire cremation, it's another option where you don't use natural gas or whatever they use for fire cremation. And the very first aquamation in California was San Diego. It's right here in San Diego, in Escondido. And it's a more environmentally friendly process where the body's put into a chamber with water that accelerates the decomposition process that would normally happen in the ground. And it comes out. I can get into detail, but the big thing is that instead of using natural gas for burning, it's less energy intense and more environmentally friendly. That's just, and the first one in California is right here in San Diego, and that's good. Right. So just FYI, that's an option. Make still sign up now. The road.
I will make a quick comment, which is to say, most like this is truly. That's not very a different direction. It has been an honor to be a fellow member of CAC with you, representing the city of San Diego. We both have a personal relationship that I value, but also to be able to work with you professionally has been fantastic. So thank you so much for your commitment. Mike, I can say you're a founding member of the CAC. So you've had the chance to see everything that has been growing here. So thank you for your years of commitment. I will also share two quick items. There is a volunteering opportunity, which is to say that you are all invited to join Community Power at the City of San Diego's Arbor Day on Friday, April 24th at Gompers Park. Staff will be planting trees and doing other beautification activities from 8:15 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. If interested and able, please reach out to CEO for more details. Thank you. I always love planting trees with Community Power. So yeah, you're doing good at the end. And also a general notice about a picnic celebration. While we will be taking a meeting recess in May, please note that our ad hoc committees still plan to meet to further their work and that staff is working on the details of a CAC member celebration picnic in mid-May. More details to come to your inbox later this month. That brings us to the end of our agenda. I appreciate everyone's participation today. We are adjourned until our next regularly scheduled meeting on June 11th, 2026 at 5:30 p.m. at the Port of San Diego. Thank you all very much.
Mayor.